Vice-Chancellor just pointed out. Finding myself here at this prestigious university, I'm reminded that every enduring institution is undergirded by two pillars: the physical structure that houses it, and the spiritual vision that sustains it. Years of our struggles to build the physical edifice of a sovereign state reached its climax in 1971 through our liberation war. And yet, even as we built a nation, our search for justice did not end. We continued to strive for a coherent system of law, rights, and responsibilities, guided not by expedience, but only by principle. Indeed, from the smoldering ruins, blood, and ashes, a state was born, but the nation remained unfinished and unfulfilled, if I may add. We glimpsed a new clarity through the revolution of 2024. In July and August last, the nation paused collectively to confront uncomfortable truths. Upheaval and unimaginable human costs. We looked inward, not to romanticize the past, but to ask whether we had lived up to the promises. It is therefore high time we asked ourselves yet again, where lies the true meaning of the state as an institution? An institution to which people pledge allegiance, which shape their collective identity and belonging, and for which they are even willing to lay down their lives. And within the vast organism that is the state, how are the overarching legal system and the judiciary regarded in relation to other pillars of governance? Are they simply functional cogs within the machinery of power, tasked with enforcement and order? Or do they embody something far deeper, a living embodiment of the Republic's moral conscience, entrusted with safeguarding justice and upholding the very principles upon which the state stands? Harold J. Lasky, the British political thinker and educator, and a quintessential realist, confined the idea of the state within a rather narrow and utilitarian framework. He viewed the state merely as a means of regulating human conduct. In his view, the state stands as the definite arbiter of society, a body of individuals who, when required, must conform to an established mode of existence and way of life. Similarly, for centuries, within the state, law was largely perceived as an adjudicatory institution to resolve disputes and preserve social order. It was maintained not always out of moral conviction, but often because the rulers of the state understood its utility and instrumental value. That is, to balance their tensions with the governed and to sustain stability within the society. As Bertrand Russell observed in his collection, Mortals and Others, and I quote, "All the great writers of the Middle Ages were passionate in their administration of law. Law, if respected and inflexibly enforced, is, in the long run, the only alternative to violence and predatory anarchy." End quote. Thus, the law was valued not because it liberated, but because it restrained. Not because it equalized, but because it maintained order. And that order, more often than not, served the comfort of the privileged rather than the cause of justice for the marginalized and the vulnerable. However, we must remember that the legal system is not a mere embodiment of rules. It is the expression of a general will that calibrates the state towards its foundational and rather minimum purpose, ensuring the common good. Indeed, as humanity endured the deepest wounds of injustice and witnessed the catastrophic consequences of unfettered exercise of state powers, a new moral consciousness emerged through the proclamation of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, which redefined the very purpose of law and in turn imbued the idea of state with a renewed meaning and construction. It reminded us that if man is not to be compelled to have recourse as a last resort to rebellion against tyranny and oppression, then human rights must be protected by the rule of law. And it is within this universal awakening that our own national history finds its resonance. People often rally behind our flags, languages, and identities shaped by heritage. They chant slogans in the name of land, speech, or shared bloodlines. But when people rise to demand a new nation, it is not merely to redraw boundaries or redefine identities. It is for something more profound. They rise for justice. When a state no longer protects the dignity of its people, when it silences their voice and denies their rightful place, the fight for justice becomes a moral necessity. Our own story speaks to this truth. The movement in 1952 was not merely about language. At its core, it was about fairness and a right to live, express, and be heard in the tongue that shapes our soul. And in 1971, we did not sacrifice lives for a flag or political independence alone. We fought for the right to belong, to be treated as equals, and to govern ourselves with dignity and hope. Ladies and gentlemen, our legal system, when viewed through philosophical lenses, emerges not as a static machinery, but as a living organism, growing, adapting, and responding to the moral pulse of society. It draws its legitimacy from its autochthonous birth in 1971, its philosophical maturity in 2024, and its continuous evolution under constitutional guidance. In order to truly appreciate the philosophical tapestry of Bangladesh's legal system, we must first reflect on its genesis, a revolutionary break from its colonial, post-colonial, and authoritarian excesses. Every legal system grapples with the fundamental question of power. The crucial principle of institutionalizing checks and balances in the exertion of power, which anchors every modern constitution, has echoed through centuries, reminding every nation that justice cannot be realized when power remains unfettered and concentrated. As Aristotle observed in his timeless work, Politics, and I quote, "There are three elements in every constitution which every serious lawgiver must consider. If these are well arranged, the Constitution itself is bound to be well arranged itself." And these three pillars are, first, the deliberative power, which discusses everything of common importance. Second, the magistracies. And third, the judicial element. End quote. This ancient wisdom later matured into a relatively modern theorization of separation of powers, foregrounding that the legislature shall make the law, the executive enforce it, and the judiciary shall interpret it. Each serves as both a partner and a restraint to the other, ensuring that the exercise of power remains balanced, accountable, and ultimately grounded only in justice. It is the equilibrium that our own constitutional order seeks to preserve, recognizing that the true strength of the state lies not in the concentration of power, but in the just distribution of power. Article 22 of our Constitution mandates the separation of the judiciary from the executive. Yet, this constitutional commitment has remained unfulfilled for far too long. Today, with a renewed vision following the July Revolution, we stand at a crossroads to finally give life to that promise, to establish a judiciary that is not merely separated, but institutionally autonomous, morally courageous, and constitutionally empowered to safeguard justice for all. It is now our solemn duty to capture these aspirations and translate them into a lasting institutional reality. By ensuring that judges are free from executive control, by securing transparent judicial appointments, by strengthening the district courts, and by safeguarding access to justice for all, the judiciary must seek independence, not merely as a constitutional rhetoric, but as a lived experience. Institutionalizing this reform will be an act of fidelity. Fidelity to the Constitution, to the ideals of 1971, and to the moral call of the July Revolution. In this regard, immediately upon assuming office, I proclaimed a roadmap for judicial reform. At its core lies the vision for a separate Supreme Court Secretariat. A separate Supreme Court Secretariat is envisioned as the central hub of judicial administration, a dynamic institution where the delivery of justice is strategically planned, efficiently coordinated, and transparently executed. Its purpose is to enhance not only the internal functioning of the judicial system, but also the overall experience of those who seek justice, ensuring it is administered with greater efficiency, clarity, and accessibility. Attached to this reform is an issue of even greater significance, that is, the judicial budget. At present, the judiciary neither draws nor controls its own expenditure, nor does it have a decisive voice in the development of its own infrastructure. The separate secretariat will therefore serve as the institutional foundation through which the judiciary may finally exercise control over its own resources, ensuring that the dispensation of justice is no longer constrained by administrative dependency. The in principle policy nod given to the Supreme Court Secretariat Ordinance 2025 just 2 days ago, on 23rd October, by the interim government cabinet, is the product of a very prudently conducted multilateral effort in which strategic posturing by the Office of the Chief Justice vis-à-vis the executive branch of this interim government has over the past 15 months played a pivotal role and will continue to do so in the foreseeable future. Accordingly, it becomes all the more incumbent on all stakeholders henceforth, like successive Supreme Court administrations, countrywide bars and bar associations, and crucially, the Supreme Court Bar Association, judges, both of the Supreme Court of Bangladesh and the district judiciaries and magistracies, and the Bangladesh Judicial Service Association in particular, to ensure the sustainability of such structural transformation by realizing one core fact. That is, we are all bound in a quid pro quo relationship here. Reciprocity, reasonableness, and avoidance of one-upmanship should be the cardinal rule of mutual relationships in ensuring the longevity of the autonomy of the judiciary. Any hint of mistrust or misguided unilateralism shall inevitably risk bringing down the edifice of institutional independence that we have been relentlessly working for the past 15 months. Distinguished participants, in the 21st century, we are still striving to operate our courts within independent strategies, procedures, and machineries that remain largely unchanged from the colonial era. In an age of artificial intelligence,